Thank you for joining our latest LEAP episode. We're so grateful today to be joined by Lou Testa with TRAC Intermodal.
Thank you, Sean.
Absolutely. It's curious with your educational background, being an economics degree recipient. How did you pivot that into logistics and shipping as you started your professional career?
Yeah, so great question. Kind of woke up in college, top of my class, which afforded me some on-campus interviews. At the time, most of the steamship companies had training programs, the two big ones, Sealand and U.S. Lines. Very exclusive training programs, only took top cream of the crop, fighting against Fort Schuyler and Kings Point guys with an economics degree, as you mentioned. Took an on-campus interview with an economics degree, had Bank of Boston, Star Markets, and then this exotic company called U.S. Lines. Father of containerization, Malcolm McLean, saw the brochure, U.S. Lines was on campus, was lucky to get the interview. Took me in the management training program, 8 months, test every week, paper due every week, book on Dress for Success. All the things you would expect of going to basically a grad school for another year. Went to college in Massachusetts. Guess where they put me? Port of Long Beach. So it was mostly like joining the Army. They wanted to throw you from what you're comfortable into a scene that you're not. I took the largest port in the U.S., Long Beach, California, and that's where I started my career. After that, you went in front of the board. It was a draft. And they told you where, you based on your ranking in your class, did okay in my ranking. There were 18 people in my class that trained all over the U.S. Got to pick the port I wanted to go to after that. You basically come out as a second lieutenant. And having that rank, you're a manager already at 22.
Wow.
At 22. And I went back to Boston to a place called Moran Terminal, which is no longer there. It's been gentrified. It's all condos now in Boston. But yeah, that's how I started my career. I was lucky to get an on-campus interview with this exotic steamship company. At that time, the ships were 1,700 40-foot containers. I remember being on the dock in L.A. in 1984 wondering how that ship crossed the Pacific. It just looked like it was so overworked. And I was like, what did I get myself into?
Second-guessing some of the experience.
Logistics worked out for me, and it's been a good run ever since.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I imagine they put you through the gamut there to see if you had the stamina and passion to stay with shipping during that experience in the West Coast. And you told me in your briefing here that in Long Beach you started there, with just 2 suitcases and no car, and you were really on your own and isolated from your support system on the East Coast. So how did you manage all those different emotions with the actual work that you were trying to accomplish and the training you were getting involved with?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It was a tough go. I remember that song "Cruel Summer" from Bananarama.
Absolutely.
I had a roommate. We had 2 Salvation Army mattresses in a room that we rented. We hitchhiked to work. We got rides to work. Back then there was no EDI. So at the end of the day, at the end of my day at 5, 6 o'clock, I'd go to the shed, pick up all the TRs, and I'd have to put them in till 9 o'clock at night. That's just the way it was back then. I was lucky to have a job as a trainee, and I had a future in logistics and a future at this company if they made it. That's another story. But you were getting great training, and you just, you had to do your time back then. And I understood that. So I put my head down. Luckily, I did have a roommate, so we were going through it together. Sad story on him. He ran MTC Corporation, Marine Terminals Corporation for a while. Walt Romanowski, another guy from New Jersey. He's since passed away already.
Oh, sorry.
But we had each other, and that was basically it. He came from the same family background as me, and we made it work. And like I said, we took tests every week. We wrote papers on typewriters, and we got a lot of education out of it. If you look at the careers of a lot of people running this business. Over the last 30 years, you'll see they either came out of U.S. Lines or Sealand.
Wow, interesting. Those are kind of breeding grounds for leadership.
Yeah. I've worked for probably all of them at one time or another, but they're mostly Sealand and U.S. Lines guys that ran the last 3. I think it's changed a lot now because those guys have retired now. But back then, those were the 2 companies. They went to all the other companies that proliferated in the steamship business since then.
Those are the core, yeah. That's interesting how you cut your teeth in those early days and just had to kind of figure it out, I suppose, with no real guidance.
Besides, they had a uniform targeted training program. That I spent 3 weeks in accounting, finance. I spent 3 weeks in sales and marketing. I spent 3 weeks in stowage. I spent 3 weeks in logistics. Wow. So they had a good program. It's not like today where they basically give you a laptop and tell you to sit down and, back then you had some training. What's changed completely nowadays. Where mostly you plugged in, they expect you to know a lot of stuff from your supply chain degree that you have, and then they hope you can figure it out. I came out with a good edge. It was like going back to school for another year. It was like a grad school degree. And then I was lucky enough to get, Crowley paid for my MBA. Wow. At that time, if you had the notion to go back to school at night, they would pay for it. So not many people took advantage of that. This is, I want to say 2004 as a supply chain degree. I went back to the University of Tennessee. Oh, wow. So I was like the only Italian at the University of Tennessee at that time.
Stuck out like a sore thumb, yeah.
But Triton sent me there. It was a 6-month class. You'd go for 2 weeks, come back for 2 weeks, and you'd get your supply chain degree. So I took advantage of what the companies offered. I think that's something that young people should do. My MBA gave up 4 years of my life on the weekends to do it. You had to go to school at that time. It wasn't on your laptop. You had to get in the car, go to the school, after working a full day of work, get home at night, do your papers on the weekends. It was much different.
That sounds like child abuse today, right?
No, I don't think a lot of people would do that work nowadays. I think life's gotten complicated too. So that, not to belittle anybody,
yeah.
But I took advantage of it to get more education and hopefully help my career, which it did. It opened doors. Most
certainly did. And in that vein, it gave you the opportunity to travel around, get more exposure. How is it, though, balancing your personal life with all of that relocation and trying to thrive in a brand new environment that you're kind of in?
Yeah.
I imagine the stresses there must have been challenging.
Very, very much so. The joke from my friends was, they heard me in Cranford, New Jersey, which is the corporate headquarters of U.S. Lines, and they expected you to move every 3 years. If you weren't moving every 3 years,
you're kidding.
You weren't moving up the line. And they recall me saying on a conference call once, when I was moving from Boston to New York, I got a black and white TV and a mattress on the roof. I can be there tomorrow. But that's what you did. Yeah, I mean, you sacrificed your social life. You didn't live home with your parents. At 22, I was I remember living in East Boston. I'm getting off track here, taking showers at the terminal because my pipes were frozen in the apartment I was in.
Wow.
But you just had to survive. I mean, it was a different time. You were on your own, and you had to figure it out.
Was that almost like a weeding out process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you weren't willing to relocate and learn a different port, a nuance of a different place, or a different job within U.S. Lines at that point, you were not moving up.
Wow.
So you really couldn't say no. If they offered you a position, that means they had a good view of you, and you should take it, and that's how you moved up.
Wow, well said. So Lou, you've been managing people since around the 80s or so, and I'm just curious, with digitalization and just changes in the way people interact with each other nowadays, how has your leadership style changed, and what are some of the core principles that remain intact today, even reflecting back into the past?
Yeah, so core principles today, right? I've always thought people come to work and they want to do a good job. I've never thought that people just show up and they want to just linger in their position. You want to empower them. You want to give them a job description, hold them accountable for exactly what you need, and explain that to them, and then let them go. I've never been afraid of having people smarter than me. I think that's my biggest takeaway in my career. I've always let people who have different skill sets than me might have a better way of doing things, never frighten me. I've always encouraged it. I've always welcomed it. And that's been my management style. Empower people, let them know exactly what they're accountable for, and then expect them to do it. And, it's worked for me. I've rarely had any conflicts in the workplace. In 41 years, I've maybe fired 2 people. And mostly because they didn't show up. It wasn't because there was a conflict in the office. Yes, you have people that, say, so-and-so isn't pulling his weight, he's not rowing, you need to address that. And I do. And most of the time, the people understand that. They're not surprised by standing tall and telling them what they're not doing.
Yes.
Most people understand it, and you can deal with it.
Yeah, great. That's clear, Lou. And I think pivoting to today's climate where everyone's remote and people are looking at the industry through machines, and that's the way they communicate with each other. How do you inject that leadership into those virtual components with your employees and the team that you're trying to shepherd?
Yes, we have virtual check-ins every day where we use the FaceTime apps to check in with the team. Very scheduled, very regimented. Again, here, as long as people know when they're supposed to be in front of you and explaining what their tasks are and where they are and those goals, we have goals for everything here. Everything here is KPIs, measured events. And as long as people understand them, we check in daily, I think it works well. I actually think the hybrid working from home, half office has given the company more proficiency. We're more efficient than we were. I remember coming into TRAC when I first started. If I got out of my office once a day to a conference room with an interdepartmental colleague, that was big. Now, probably 4 times a day, I'm talking to an interdepartmental person, and we're discussing where we're going with our goals.
Wow.
So I think we've increased our efficiency by working from home 10 times.
Yeah, it's interesting to have that balance too, to your point, and you save time perhaps with the commute where you don't have to handle that on the front end or back end of your day.
I think we're getting 3 hours a day more out of people.
Wow.
And we kind of joked earlier before we sat down here about the efficiencies you get from working from home. And, a lot of people, you give up lunch, you give up breakfast sometimes, but people understand that they have that advantage from working from home and they don't have that commute, and they're willing to do the extra work because of it. So I think it's a win-win for both the employee and the company. I hate using that cliche, but I've seen our efficiency gone up since COVID, and I've seen our collaboration go up since COVID.
That's amazing.
We were siloed. We were all in our little offices. You'd get out of your office once a day. Now we're talking to each other on Teams 4 or 5 times a day.
It's necessary to take a step back and really engage them on a Teams call or a virtual way and really get that grease flowing a little bit there.
And for me, we call them regional equipment managers. I have field operations here in Princeton, but my regional equipment managers are all over the country. They're in LA, they're in Seattle, they're in Oakland, they're in Chicago. So I have to commute via Teams. There's no way I could manage people without Teams right now. I only have 2 people in Princeton that actually work for me. My other 12, 14, whatever regional equipment managers are based in those cities, watching the equipment flow there and optimizing that.
Makes sense. Do you see any potential negatives with going full remote? I mean, do you think that balance of a hybrid structure is important to at least have that interpersonal relationship still there and perhaps fuel those water cooler conversations?
Perfect. Yeah, I think having those water cooler conversations, having people in the same room listening to what somebody else is doing, you gain knowledge that way. I think you do miss out on a lot of that being in the office. That said, you can get around it through Teams and educational programs, but there's something to be said for relationships, personal relationships, and being face-to-face with people. I'm all about the network and the relationship. I think it's helped my career 10 times. Being at several different companies, your career is going to change, and it probably won't be because of something you did.
Right.
It'll probably be an outside factor that company was sold, company was bought, relocation that wasn't really what you were looking for. Something's going to happen in your career. So having a network and a personal relationship with other people and colleagues within the industry is a big, big factor.
Well said, well said. And it's funny because I think engagement is such a critical topic nowadays with ensuring that colleagues are attentive to the company and what's going on a day in, day out level. And I'm curious what tools and techniques that you inject with your team to really fuel those efforts. You said you have the daily check-ins, But are there any other things that you can use and do utilize and leverage to ensure your colleagues are more aware of the company holistically?
It's a great question. I am probably the most transparent manager in TRAC. I share everything. I share our financials. I share, not the confidential financials,
sure,
but I think sharing exactly where we stand, getting out the information from a corporate level, corporate to the field, letting them know what exactly the goals of the company are outside their little realm, their realm of Chicago, letting them know what the big picture is, helps everyone check in and understand what the goals are of the corporation. So I'm a big, for lack of a better word, I'm a big sharer of information, whether I get it from another department or I get it from another source. I let people know what's going on outside their bubble.
Wow, that's well said.
That's basically how I do it.
Yeah.
And people are like, wow, no one ever shared this with me before. It's been said to me 100 times. I'm like, well, you need to know.
And you're really showing trust in your team when you go through those efforts.
They appreciate it and they learn from it, right? You want to empower people. You want them to learn. You want them to add value to your organization. So the more they know, the more value they're going to add.
Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship.
And they feel important, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. Like the work they do matters and fuels the efforts of the organization at the end of the day as well.
Yes, sir.
So that's a good sentiment to harp on. And I guess in that line of thinking, when you're talking about mentoring team or new talent within a company in logistics, shipping, or elsewhere, I guess what are some of the qualities you look for in these younger professionals, and how can you really talk to them about their career trajectory and where they can go, and how best to utilize their time during the week to make their next journey in their career fruitful in logistics?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of, if someone's accelerating in your team, to recognizing it. Mm-hmm. So here at TRAC, we have Above and Beyond Awards. I participate every quarter. I try to recognize the people that are accelerating their career here, so that the organization as a whole knows who they are, so they can pick them from maybe a different department. It's easy to see these people. I mean, it's not hard. I also go through IANA, the Future Leaders of Logistics Company. I recommend people for that. So again, I provide another source of education to them through an outside organization where they can build networks with colleagues outside of TRAC, and increase their educational background. So I use IANA Future Leaders Program. I use Above and Beyond here for TRAC, where we give monetary award for outstanding performance. I think that's, and it's relatively a very good compensation for doing something. We want to recognize you for adding value. We want to promote you for that within the organization from your current job. We want you to gather education from another source if we can. And look, I'm all about the nomenclature of the business. When people come in, I start talking about TOFC and COFC and East Coast wheel settings and West Coast wheel settings and
all this vernacular.
All that, trying to share as much of the industry as I picked up through my career. But again, and teach them that every operation in the U.S. has a nuance. Yeah. None of them are the same. LPC in Chicago is hybrid. UP in Chicago is fully wheeled. This stuff you have to understand from the day one. So I try to share as much knowledge on all the nuances of all the operations to the younger talent and mentor them that way through what I know in the nomenclature, through what I know about the nuance of the operation, through what I can do for them outside of TRAC to increase the
comprehension of the industry. And
exactly.
Those are fantastic efforts that you've articulated. Do you notice now that we're kind of in this post-COVID environment that some colleagues within shipping and logistics are in some circles a little disconnected from the practical application of shipping, whether it's not being close to a terminal or a depot and not seeing how those elements kind of weave themselves together? Do you feel like that's the case? And if so, is there any impact?
So Rodney Dangerfield, right? It sounds good on paper, right? Everybody, his
Absolutely.
His back to school thing where he says, yeah, tell that to the waste management people. I say that all the time here. it looks good on paper, but it might not work. So, they're not completely disconnected. I want to make it sound that way. There's a lot of ways of getting around the nuances of a particular operation.
Absolutely.
And yeah, being hybrid might affect that, but I don't think it has a big impact on the daily operation from my perspective, because they're gathering I want them to travel to their area and see it firsthand so they understand it. But being away from the operation, I think, if you know what it looks like and you've been there maybe once a quarter checking it out, you'll be fine working from a hybrid situation.
Well said. I mean, Home Depot has a process where their corporate colleagues are required to stay in one of their stores for an entire week once a year. And that brings a lot of tangibility to the work they do on corporate to make sure that they're relatable to what happens on the front end. So I think
Mike Bafoco, U.S. Lines guy, runs AV logistics for Home Depot. Right?
There we go. Okay.
The network again. I know a lot about that because I know the guy who's the president of AV logistics.
Well said. It's interesting with your background and the career you've had and the roles you've been responsible to drive, how today they're kind of more technically sound. They have a lot of financial implications. But in the same instance, you almost have to be really evolved on a soft skill level with what you do and relate to people in certain ways that are more fluid and almost have a degree of salesmanship with what you do.
Absolutely.
Are those skills important with your job?
Again, we talked about relationships. I build relationships with my whole team. Everybody's different. What floats their boat is different, and you have to understand that. We have a myriad of personalities. Getting along with all those personalities, I think it's definitely changed over 40 years. Like you said, it's a little bit softer sell now than when I started. People were a lot harsher in their accountability of what you needed to do. Now it's kind of a little bit more touchy-feely, but still, here we're a capitalist organization. We're not here to not be a capitalist organization. We're here to make money. That's what our shareholders expect. And people need to realize that. It's about the numbers. I mean, we touched about this before we started this conversation. I'm sure we'll touch on it again, about the changing dynamic from private ownership to hedge fund and publicly ownership over my 40-year career. When I started, it was all public. Now it's all or privately owned. We both work for privately owned companies. Totally different landscape now, working for hedge funds, where you have to perform quarterly. If you're not, there's no, lack of a better word, pussyfooting around what's going to happen.
It's interesting that you bring up that piece, too, because with shipping, as we know, it's a very cyclical business. Mm-hmm. So some quarters, some years are very challenging, but that's for the future of what's going on with the company and with the direction setting you're strategizing toward. So do you see that helping or hurting efficiency within a company of having those, I guess, external voices kind of at the table?
Absolutely. I think having a longer-term view will help the company succeed if you have unified ownership. The way logistics companies work now, they're all owned by hedge funds, all short-term. That's just my opinion. A lot of short-term thinking, quarterly to quarter. Maybe you're looking 3 months out. You have a year plan. After the year plan, there's no 100-year Japanese kind of thinking where you have a 100-year plan for your corporation.
Well said.
Very different than when I started. Even when I started, you had a 5-year plan. Now, now it's down to 1. But we're talking about the cost, CPUD, M&R, cost per unit day, logistics CPUD. We're talking about that daily. That's a daily conversation on financial aspects because you're reporting to a publicly traded company or a hedge fund. And most of the logistics companies now are owned by either one of those. So I think that's what's changed in the last 20 years of my career, is that more focus on finance and knowing your numbers and short-term looks
and performance,
versus long-term thinking about what you want to do with a corporation.
Absolutely. Makes sense. Pivoting more toward the operations side of things, with the rise and fall of intermodal rail and depots that are on the inland side, how has traditional port-to-truck business evolved? and what challenges still remain there in optimizing long-haul inland container logistics?
So, look, IPI cargo, we do a lot of it here at TRAC. I don't. The problem with IPI cargo is balancing. Mm-hmm. It's always the balance part, right? You know, west to east, east to west. It's always west to east, and then backfilling that west portion, whether you cabotage it with another company that supplies some money to get the container back to the Asia, that's one way. Mm-hmm. But the balance is the biggest thing for us, either hub and spoke balance or across the country for IPI cargo. I think IPI cargo moves very well right now. It's just, you know, for example, in New York, we have 2 rail ramps, CSX, NS, comes across with expedited freight from the West Coast to the New York metro area. Mm-hmm. That container's picked up at one of those ramps with a TRAC chassis, but it's dumped at the port because the empty has to go back. They're not going to rail the empty back to the West Coast. They're going to put it on a ship, and we all know about the empty problems here in New York. So the chassis ends up at the port, and that chassis has to go back to the next expedited load at NS. That's a huge problem, that balance, and who's going to pay for that split. And people, you know, they understand it, but they don't want to know about it. So
exactly.
Balancing in my business is the biggest thing that I deal with on a daily basis.
Wow, yeah, makes sense. It certainly is, and even with chassis availability, that's been a major challenge post-COVID in terms of inland logistics. So how do you see the industry adapting to best optimize some of the equipment shortages, let's say, that are in certain depots on the domestic level?
Biggest change since COVID, trucker-owned wheels. The minute COVID hit, right after that, there's several chassis companies in the business. Everybody term leased their chassis. Mm-hmm. So the pool shrank, and the term lease chassis proliferated. Mm-hmm. In most markets in the U.S. now, it's 70% trucker-owned wheels. We are becoming like the rest of the world. We're the only country that has privately owned chassis, not owned by the truck companies. The rest of the world, truck companies own the chassis. It's becoming that way. It's 70-30, say now, for all the companies within the chassis business. We're still in the chassis business, but it went on term lease rather than pool. Yeah. The biggest problem for me is, when are you going to want the pool? We don't know how many chassis are privately owned now. So you don't exactly, it's a nuance to know when they're going to reach, when they're going to use their own assets, they're paying for them, they're going to use those every day.
Right.
When are they going to go after the pool assets is the big question. And it's, you know, everyone thinks this is a science. It's not. You know, you get people yelling at you don't have enough pool chassis ready. Well, for 3 weeks you didn't need them because the import level wasn't high enough. But now the import level is high, and you're going to need to drain from the pool rather than use your own assets. Yeah. That's the biggest issue I deal with daily, is the nuances of when people will go to the pools around the country for our assets to keep the intermodal and logistics flow flowing. Wow.
Do you see technology being a driver to help alleviate that challenge in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different ways. The GPS, you know, that's a big driver.
The monitoring
right now.
piece.
Yeah. Monitoring piece, you know, all the aspects of it. Is the chassis loaded, empty? You know, there's so many things that we're working on with companies like BlackBerry to understand our business better and get the analytics that you need to know how a certain, again, every port is different. Every rail ramp is different. You need to understand all those nuances to operate during the day, and historical data helps you figure that out. I depend a lot on that. I know how if imports go above 24,000 in New York, I know someone's going to come after the pool. I know just intuitively, I know the truck market can't support that level. Somewhere between 22 and 24,000 imports, they're going to want to use pool chassis. So that's when, you know, but knowing how much to spend to get in front of that is the balance.
Yeah, good point. So you've been in logistics for multiple decades now, and I imagine you've built up a reservoir of intuition and different, you know, case-specific situations in shipping that you've thought about and dwelled on and have been involved with in leading in decision-making. So within your job, how much do you balance the day in, day out visibility of data along with those kind of feelings that you have just being in the industry for so long?
A lot. Sean, honestly, a lot of what I do is gut feeling. I look at the data. I just did our positioning report for the month of January, right? To see, we had a budget, we had a forecast. Where do we stand? But I kind of know where the minefields are. From my gut feeling, I know we talked about Croxton, NS balancing. KCS in Dallas is another one. It's 60 miles away from the other rail ramps, UP and BN. You see those you know where those landmines are going to be in your gut, and then the data kind of backs it up when you see the final month-end closure. But a lot of what I do, I count on a lot of other people to data mine for me. A lot of what I do is gut. I don't want to sit on assets that are doing nothing. Yeah. So I'd rather maybe I dispose of them, sell them offshore. I don't know, but a lot of what I do is gut historical versus data.
Well, which makes sense logically because you have this predetermined notion of what is the proper decision, and then data is kind of like a guide or compass to reference.
Correct. Before
you pull the trigger, let's say, ultimately on some of that stuff.
But just by knowing the landmines, again, knowing the nuances of every place. How does Norfolk run? You kind of get a feel.
You get a flavor of it.
Feel for the operation. And I've had the advantage. We talked about this early in my career of moving around. So lived in Oakland, San Francisco with Triton. Lived in California for U.S. Lines, and I spend a lot of time in California right now for TRAC. Boston, New York, Baltimore, Chicago with Inchcape. You kind of have that background of knowing who the players are and what the locations look like.
And leveraging the network. If we could just touch upon AI briefly. I'm not sure if you're using that today or if your team is engaging with its potential and power, but I'm curious where you see that landscape of AI and automation going in terms of some of the decision making and where it can find a niche within logistics.
Yeah, so takes away the mundane tasks, right? That's where I see AI for TRAC. We do so many manual reports at TRAC that I think AI, not going to reduce the headcount, it's just going to make you more efficient by taking away the mundane daily tasks that we have. And we have a lot of them. So, as far as our ownership, Stone Peak, TRAC is of all their portfolio, we are the leader in AI for, they own Textainer also. We're the leader in AI. I have just been recently exposed to our own TRAC GPA, whatever we call it. I just recently had exposure to it, and they want me to, move on with it.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm trying to get up to speed. It's not my forte. IT has never been my forte. I'm more of an operator. But I like the idea of it. And it's conversational. I think it's going to help the company. It's just going to increase the efficiency of the employee by taking away the mundane tasks. I think we have a good team here on the IT side. They're kind of walking me through it right now, but we're in the infancy stage. I think there's a long way to go for us as a company, and I think the industry in general. But as that knowledge base, as you teach the machine, what you're looking for on a daily basis, I think it's going to help us a lot.
That's well summarized. And you're right, it's an algorithm at the end of the day. So someone's going to have to train that algorithm on how to understand the business and make decisions that are appropriate with eliminating those mundane tasks that you said that are still important to do, but what ultimately make the employee more strategic and not necessarily eliminate their involvement with the task, but just make them, like you said, more effective.
Yeah, it frees up time to work on more important aspects of our job. It takes away the mundane.
Well said. So with shipping and containerization at ports, I feel like the spend, right, on logistics is becoming much more problematic in some cases. So how can you control that a little bit? How are you able to look at the spend, look at the cost, and diminish that?
Yeah, so a perfect example of that relationship-wise, right? We need EDI data to bill our customers for chassis usage.
Yes.
Terminals need our chassis to work their ships. Hazardous, overdimensional, customs. They need some sort of asset to work their vessels. So we have that symbiotic relationship where you need our assets, we need your data. You need to build those relationships so that you both, I hate to use the term win-win, but that's how it works in today's business environment. No one wants to spend any extra money for anything, so you have to find ways around that work for both parties.
Yeah, well said. Going back to conflict resolution, you've spent a lot of your time in operations, you're an excellent and proficient operator. Have you had any friction with the commercial side of the business? And when that's happened, if at all, what are some ways that you kind of come to a proper ground to understand their perspective on things and ensure that you have some, let's say, operator integrity that's still there?
Yeah, so look, I've always been a hybrid kind of person. My career has always been kind of teetering on the sales and marketing side just because of my personality. So I am an operator, but I've always kind of favored the marketing and sales guys, probably to my detriment. And sometimes we're a perfect example, and you probably know about this example, is where I'd leave containers lingering that could be used in assets because a marketing individual told me they were going to book them. Wow. So I've always kind of walked that thin line between cost and future revenue, right? Leave a container, hope it's going to get booked, or evacuate it back to Asia for that 9th trip versus 7th trip. So my conflict, to answer your question, my conflicts have mostly been with operators.
Is that right? Interesting.
Because
you've had your foot in both camps a little bit.
Because of me trying to work the revenue side from a marketing perspective and not the cost side from an operating side. So it's probably opposite of most operators, because I've always been a hybrid, where I'm straddling that line between, helping the marketing team execute their plan and also trying to keep the costs under control.
Which is a good perspective to have at the end of the day, and probably makes you more effective in a leadership role.
Yeah, it's different than a lot of people
Not conventional,
in your career, I'm sure. It was interesting with my last boss that you know very well, because I would always kind of back the marketing side of the business. So
absolutely, made for some interesting dialogue, I'm sure. So pivoting back to the networking piece, what advice can you give to younger professionals in shipping to seek out a mentor, someone that can kind of shepherd them and provide some assistance with growing their career?
Yeah, so look, absolutely no one's going to give you anything, right? You have to approach someone that you think can help you in your career and is willing to help you in your career, someone who has extra time to do that. I've always, if someone comes to me and they want my help, I've always tried to do that. So I don't think anyone's going to look bad at you for that, but you've got to grab it. No one's going to give you anything. Everyone's too busy in their life. You always think, they're thinking about you. They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about picking up the kids at 3 o'clock. Until you reach out to them and say, I'd like to explore some opportunities in the company or in our department or outside the company, they're not gonna necessarily approach you. You have to go grab it from somebody that you respect in the company and that you think is willing to help you. That's just it. I mean, they'll probably recognize you as a go-getter, and before you even approach them, I think that's to your advantage. But you got to ask for help.
Extend the olive branch, take that plunge, take that risk, and really try to network yourself even within the company, because that could have some other benefits as well.
Look, your reputation in this business is everything. Your reputation as we use this term around this company a lot, a decent human being, is a big deal. I mean, you want the company to succeed. Again, we're a capitalist organization, so there are, measures and goals that we have to achieve, but you want to do it as a decent human being too. And that's how I approach my day. I don't want to be that guy.
And it's still a people business at the end of the day. We're still pushing a button on a computer.
For all the big ships, all the containers, all the chassis, all the truck companies, this business is so small. You go to something like TPM, there's 3,000 people there. Of that 3,000, there's probably 250 that really run North America. I would say.
Interesting. That's
when you
incredible.
think of who's actually in charge, the pool is very small of the top executives that run logistics in the U.S. I mean, think about what's happened over the last 20 years on the maintenance side of the business, right? You're basically down now to 4 vendors through this whole country. And they all started as mom and pop operations. And they managed to move from mom and pop to buying other people out. You're looking at, 4, maybe 6 large vendors in the U.S. I mean, it's getting very tight because we all know nobody really wants to work on a chassis in Minneapolis in December.
Amen.
So,
Absolutely.
The business is shrinking from a vendor perspective. It's consolidating from a line perspective. It's consolidating from a trucking perspective, a chassis perspective, just constant consolidation. So the player pool is smaller of who's running things.
And everyone knows each other's name now, and it's just much more tight-knit.
And your reputation precedes you most of the time.
If you could provide some advice to aspiring professionals that are new and considering the logistics industry, even to students, what would that be? What would you provide them in terms of some guidance on how to break in to shipping?
Yeah, look, there's so many different logistics fields now than when I got into it. Now we talked about all the technology. There's probably 50 companies I could name that are on the technology side of logistics. So wherever you feel you fit, everyone has a fit. I'd say that about my team. Everyone has something to offer, a value, just putting them in the right place. So if your propensity is towards IT, there's an IT supply chain company that would be interested in you. If you're an operations guy or a logistics guy, there's a railroad or a steamship line or a chassis company that would be interested in you. You just have to find what you're passionate about and then find the company that fits your background. I think the supply chain, it's been in the news for the last 10 years now.
Yeah.
There's no greater field in the U.S. right now. It's talked about consistently with all the infrastructure bills that are the government's putting out. It's all about supply chain and supply chain efficiency. Plenty of room for your career in this field. I've made a good living 41 years now, going on 43, I think.
Maybe another 43 after that too.
Yeah. So I'm all for people getting into the supply chain business. I think you have a lot of opportunity there.
There's not a lot of dull moments in shipping, that's for sure.
No.
Well, Lou, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your expertise today, and I appreciate you tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.